Dawning at 0600 local time, a Ukrainian operator released two FP-2 strike drones into the murk, descending to 50 feet above the marshland, toward a span located 95 kilometers south of his position, deep within Russian-held terrain. What escaped his awareness was that Moscow's forces had already identified the single passable corridor through this swamp, and they'd set their ambush accordingly. 40 kilometers to the south, a Russian fire group commander pressed his headset tight against his ear, straining to catch sounds cutting through the fog. Behind those initial two airframes, 4 additional FP-2s spread themselves wide and dropped into the vegetation. Skimming 50 feet over the salt flat, engines throttled back, the landscape blurred past, close enough to distinguish individual wormwood plants. The 6 machines settled into a loose, staggered formation, each separated so a single missile couldn't eliminate 2 at once. Identical airframes, yet each assigned a different strike objective, each scheduled to hit the bridge in a sequence planned days in advance. Nothing across this expanse rose taller than a fence post, and that barrenness was precisely the advantage Ukraine needed. A flat, monotonous terrain counts as a strategic asset out here. It's like discovering your minivan's most valuable trait is that nobody wants to steal it. Flying at this altitude shields the package from the radar networks protecting Russia's air defense cluster near Zhukoi, positioned approximately 35 kilometers southeast. But this maneuver demands payment. It funnels every drone in the formation down into a single, narrow corridor the geography permits. The Savage consists of shallow salt basins and treacherous mud. Only a handful of firm passages cut the right direction for approaching the bridge. Any operator studying identical maps identifies those same few routes, and the Russians have understood where that corridor runs for quite some time. Inside a command truck, bristling with whip antennas, that same commander keyed his radio and began speaking in a measured, unhurried tone. He never lifted his gaze toward the sky above. He didn't require it. The drones had already revealed their location to him. What reached him through that headset was a signal, faint, steady, arriving from 95 kilometers north. Not originating from the drones themselves, from the relay aircraft hovering at altitude above the launch team, the flying repeater forwarding their commands to an FP-2 they couldn't observe and couldn't contact directly. That relay had just disclosed precisely where to focus his attention. The FP-2 operates via radio link. At this distance, that connection functions exclusively through a relay. A manually controlled strike drone, 95 kilometers distant, sits far beyond the horizon of any ground-based antenna. So Ukraine deploys a repeater airframe positioned high in the middle, circling where it observes both the operator and the target, relaying the signal across the gap. It withstands the heaviest Russian jamming attempts and extends beyond any reach a ground antenna could achieve. That extended capability is the precise reason Ukraine maintains these relays. A ground-based jammer can obliterate a direct link in moments, but a repeater stationed high between the trench and the objective becomes vastly harder to suppress. And honestly, that's the mechanism enabling a team in one position to pilot a drone toward a bridge they'll never actually witness. Yet a transmitting link also functions as a beacon anyone can locate. Russian signal hunters monitor for exactly this emission, capture a bearing, and pinpoint whoever's positioned beneath it. Imagine waving a flashlight in a darkened room, excellent for seeing where you're walking, and the first target anyone hunting you will acquire. The identical link that controls a drone 95 kilometers into a bridge had just exposed the team to Russia's most lethal drone unit. Those operators understood the trade intimately, so they kept their transmissions brief and pushed the airframes deeper down the corridor. The package was now bound to that single lane the terrain allowed. Should even one radar locate them in that exposed passage, the entire formation would combust mid-air, with no descent and no concealment available. And this is what the launch team remained unaware of. The Russians weren't attempting to block that corridor. They'd invested a week ensuring the drones entered precisely that route. The trap wasn't marked on any map. It was embedded within the terrain itself. First contact erupted from that lane without announcement. A shoulder-mounted missile, probably an Eaglet-class infrared seeker. A tube one soldier carries and discharges from his shoulder directly at the leading FP2, unleashed by a crew concealed somewhere in the reeds. Zero radar warning, zero lock tone, only a smoke plume rising from the grass. It's fundamentally a bottle rocket with malice. Limited range, no guidance computer. Sufficient proximity and heat renders a brain unnecessary. It hunts thermal signatures, locking onto the hottest object in its view. At that hour, 2 warm engines against freezing dawn conditions. The drone's automated evasion engaged instantly upon detecting launch, hauling the airframe into a steep climbing maneuver, precisely what the Russians had anticipated. Recall that climb the drone just executed? Because it becomes critical in approximately 10 seconds. A shoulder-fired infrared seeker operates at short range, but devastates targets in the weeds. The counter-move is ascending rapidly and breaking the shot before the seeker locks. The missile's operational ceiling reaches merely a few kilometers straight up. Consequently, a drone with energy reserves simply climbs beyond its reach and watches it exhaust below. Picture dodging an opening jab by straightening up. This works superbly against that initial strike. It also positions your chin perfectly for the cross-punch you never anticipated. That climb defeated the shoulder-fired round cleanly, but it lifted the FP2 off the deck into whatever had remained silent on either side of the corridor. The strike drone, wingspan approaching 6 meters, had demonstrated it possessed survival capability. Now arrived the genuinely difficult portion. A missile shrieked from a launcher on the left perimeter. Vertical launch, Mach 2 before eyesight could track it. The FP2 at peak climb disintegrated into the morning atmosphere. One heartbeat later, the right perimeter erupted. An identical shot from the opposing side of the lane. That was a 9K331 Tor M2, Russia's mobile short-range air defense system, engineered explicitly to eliminate drones, cruise missiles, and low-flying aircraft before they penetrate the boundary. 8 missiles prepared on the launcher. 4 targets engaged simultaneously, without transferring to a separate radar vehicle. Everything it requires to locate, pursue, and neutralize rides aboard a single platform. 2 of them, each positioned in the marsh on opposite flanks. Each Tor M2 costs approximately $25 million, roughly $50 million in Russian air defense embedded in that marsh. Yet in roughly 90 seconds, both get eliminated by drones costing mere tens of thousands of dollars each. $50 million worth of radar and missiles, undone by a strike package valued below the missiles those Tors had just launched. To be frank, the Tor carries 2 vulnerabilities particularly relevant this morning. Firstly, it depends on command guidance. Its own radar must remain transmitting and steer the missile all the way in, which means the instant it stops broadcasting, every missile it has airborne becomes inert and plummets away. And more fundamentally, regardless of its firepower, the Tor itself features light armor. Visualize your home security apparatus, motion sensors, cameras, the entire setup. Genuinely challenging to bypass, until someone walks onto the porch and unplugs it, Two of these now flank the lane. The surviving drones had to thread through a crossfire above open marsh with absolutely zero ground cover remaining. The fire group commander observed the trap close precisely as he'd constructed it. Drones ascending into the crossfire. The salt flat strobing beneath missile motor illumination. He'd already transmitted that Ukrainian uplink bearing up the command chain. Behind him, a Rubicon signal team was converting his approximate bearing into precise grid coordinates. Rubicon represents Russia's counter-drone targeting apparatus. Signal hunters, whose mission involves locating Ukrainian operators via their broadcasts and relaying coordinates to the nearest accessible shooter before that crew relocates. The crossfire inflicted actual damage. One FP2 took a proximity detonation and tumbled into a lagoon. An elite drone was already gone. The package scattered, shedding machines across the marsh, and the Russians felt convinced they'd sprung the trap flawlessly. What they hadn't yet recognized was the character of that climb they'd just witnessed. One drone climbs because the operator panicked. The other climbs because someone on the Ukrainian side deliberately wanted those two Tors to activate their radars. The Russians fired on everything that revealed itself, exactly per procedure, and executed precisely what Ukraine required. Because the instant those Tor radars illuminated for firing, they ceased being hunters and transformed into targets. Two of the FP2 drones had been loitering wide of the lane throughout, hanging back and anticipating one particular moment. They hadn't pursued the launchers, the vehicles, or the reed line. They'd been conserving fuel and warheads for two targets that hadn't yet manifested themselves. That represented the complete strategy. Deploy them with the package so they're already aloft, already waiting the moment the Tors activate. Now they got it. Two Tor radar dishes illuminated and rotating, broadcasting across the marsh for anyone with the appropriate receivers. The pair of FP2s rolled inbound. That rotating panel atop the Tor represents the sole thing the FP2 was pursuing. That identical principle that exposed the Ukrainian launch team moments earlier reversed direction. A transmitter constitutes a target, and this particular one couldn't risk going silent. The Tor faced mandatory activation of every transmission to see the intruder, and every transmission now directed the intruder precisely which compartment to enter. The command guidance snare had closed from both directions simultaneously. While its radar maintained transmission and directed missiles at the leading drones, the Tor couldn't extinguish without dropping those missiles out of the sky. It remained locked on the air, and the two FP2s accelerated straight in. Both Tors absorbed their strikes within the same handful of seconds. The FP2 represents a fielded strike platform. 6 meters wingspan, 215 kilograms of launch, 105 kilograms warhead, sufficient to obliterate a lightly armored launcher, with capacity remaining. 200 kilometers maximum range, equivalent to Los Angeles to San Diego. 2 operational modes: autonomous, programmed onto a fixed objective, or manual via radio link for dynamic targets. And what mattered most this morning: fly it manually through a relay, and the drone responds to whichever repeater carries the signal, not to one stationary antenna in one stationary trench. It cost a fraction of that $25 million target it had just destroyed. What it surrenders for price, it doesn't return. Planners constructed that into the equation from inception. A heavy strike warhead against a lightly armored launcher presents no contest. The eastern platform shatters into spinning shrapnel. From the western flank, the second launcher detonates where it stands. Black smoke billows above the reeds. Back in the weeds, the surviving FP2 descends low and races toward the bridge. That week-long ambush, two of Russia's finest short-range air defense systems, dug in, masked, positioned, now sits as two burning vehicles on a salt flat. And the hunters have become the hunted. But the fire commander had already secured the single element that mattered to him. He'd surrendered 2 Tors and his trap, certainly. But he possessed something superior. The Ukrainian uplink that had been broadcasting for minutes. The grid coordinates were fixed, and he'd already distributed them. A burning launcher gets replaced inside a week. A seasoned drone crew cannot, which marks the instant when the entire hunt inverted and commenced running the opposite direction. In a dugout 40 kilometers back, a Rubicon signal officer had been calculating those grid coordinates throughout, one bearing at a time. For him, the burning launchers constituted background noise. The signal underneath them was his objective, a fixed dish transmitting, positioned above a crew. He relayed the coordinate and resumed listening. Back at the launch position, a compact fixed-wing drone climbed into the sky overhead and commenced a broad orbit. 0 warhead mounted beneath it. 0 dive, 0 attack sequence. The strike drone remained 43 kilometers from the bridge. Call it 6 minutes at current velocity. The Rubicon FPV was already aloft, closing on their grid in under 4 minutes. And the reconnaissance airframe above them possessed perhaps 60 seconds before it assembled a targeting solution sufficiently accurate to correct an inbound warhead. Simply a patient, methodical circuit directly above the dugout, while it maintained its turn and observed. Observe that diminutive fixed-wing drone circling above the position, completely unencumbered, nothing protruding beneath its wings. It's not present to assault the team, it's present to examine them. And that happens to be substantially worse. Rubicon's signal team had furnished this reconnaissance drone with a bearing, and its assignment now entailed pinpointing the exact location and adjusting the incoming strike in real time. The drone loiters, monitors, and transmits a live feed back to the shooter, modifying the aim point as the target shifts. It's the distinction between throwing a punch blindfolded and executing one with a companion positioned behind the target, calling out precisely where to direct it. Following the reconnaissance drone's fix, an FPV drone, or a Lancet, carries out the conclusion. That crew in the dugout couldn't comprehend the full scope of what had discovered them. Rubicon's hunters had reportedly devastated 70% of a Ukrainian brigade's drone operators inside 7 days. The spotter locates you, signals, and maintains pointing, while the shooter advances the strike. Eliminate the spotter's vision, and the shooter launches blind. Ukraine's own dish had led that spotter directly overhead, and the team possessed seconds to address the camera rotating above their position. 1 heartbeat later, an FPV interceptor rocketed straight up at the orbiting reconnaissance machine. A collision, not a detonation. Should that camera obtain a clean fix before they disable it, the correction would arrive with the inbound FPV, and the subsequent object penetrating the dugout roof would carry a warhead. No warhead on the interceptor, no sophisticated sensor. Simply a rapid, small drone aimed physically at the adversary machine. Akin to hurling a stone at a bird, except the stone travels at 80 miles per hour and steered through a jittering first-person camera with 0 margin for pilot hesitation. The initial pass missed cleanly. A second interceptor launched immediately behind it. This one connected. It sent the Russian reconnaissance drone spiraling into the reeds and removed the spotter's vision with it. Stripping the spotter of visibility didn't eliminate the grid Rubicon possessed, but it degraded the accuracy of whatever followed. The inbound Rubicon FPV now carried a degraded position and zero active correction guiding it. Even compromised, it still represented a warhead aimed at the dugout, even if it landed several meters distant. And worse, the strike drone remained nowhere approaching the bridge. It was operating manual now, which signified the team couldn't stop transmitting, couldn't evacuate, and couldn't go dark while piloting it. The single element preserving their drone aloft was the exact element drawing hunters toward them. 8 kilometers from the bridge, the surviving FP2 was under manual command. Ukraine flew it by hand. The pilot's fingers locked on the sticks, perspiration descending his spine inside the sealed dugout, threading the fuselage through low mist persisting over the Savage. And the approach was deteriorating. Manual flying at this range through mist this dense, with the aim point drifting a meter at a time. Following their present trajectory, they were going to miss the bridge by sufficient distance to leave it operational. And they couldn't revise it the straightforward method, because the straightforward method meant remaining precisely where they were. The FPV link necessitated a transmitting position, and the Rubicon FPV was closing on their grid right now. Each second managing the sticks, refining the approach, represented another second stationary at a location the opponent had already pinpointed. Hold the link and strike the bridge, and extremely probably absorb a hit in that identical minute. Or sever the link, survive, and observe the operation abort 8 kilometers short of a bridge. No alternative crew-inhabited position to complete. Maintain and perhaps lose everything, or cut and certainly fail. No satisfactory resolution existed in that dugout. So instead of selecting, they executed something the fire group commander had dedicated the whole morning making impossible. That crew's extended, vulnerable, hunted approach wasn't improvised survival. It was the strategy. They were always intending to navigate the hazardous middle and pass the drone ahead before the bill arrived. 50 kilometers distant, a secondary relay drone had maintained a quiet orbit since before launch, positioned high enough to observe that identical patch of sky above the bridge. Upon signal, Team B pushed their relay into the connection and captured the drone's feed. The FP2 progressed without the slightest interruption. In that instant, Team A's relay departed its orbit and sprinted for safety, and the launch team's antenna collapsed against the truck bed. 2 signal connections 50 kilometers separated, one activating, one extinguishing, and the drone never registered transition. Examine what those 2 relays accomplished. The gold one advancing into the connection, while the first withdraws westward. That solitary exchange represents the whole mechanism preserving any of these operators still living. The drone obeys whichever relay carries its signal, not one ground installation anchored to one trench. Consequently, any Ukrainian crew carrying a repeater in the appropriate piece of sky can assume the feed and direct the flying without the drone ever registering a handoff. A drone tethered to one ground antenna ceases functioning the instant that antenna goes silent. A drone operated through a relay network simply requires a different relay and remains indifferent regarding which crew possesses the controller. Command transitions from one team to another, a town distant. Ukraine had drilled that transition repeatedly, a rapid confirmation that the incoming crew remains friendly and operates the correct machine, and the connection transfers smoothly from one relay to the next. Picture a pair sharing one video game. One controller exchanged between them midway, except the second participant occupies an entirely separate town, and the first participant's singular function, the instant the handoff transfers, consists of standing and running. Team A was dark now and already evacuating. Team B remained quiet, undetected, directing a drone 8 kilometers from that bridge. The Rubicon FPV appeared above Ukraine's dugout moments afterward and encountered the position evacuating. The grid, supposed to contain a transmitting crew, held a folded antenna and a truck already advancing. The hunter had arrived at a location that no longer existed. Antenna down, crew vanished.